Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Q&A with Qlik. We're excited to have you all here today. Today's topic is Qlik Sense Enterprise Monitoring and Observability, which hopefully it will help you if you're new to the topic or an existing users looking for some, tricks and tips on it, help you understand it better and learn even more. This webinar series is a live question and answer. So what we want you to do is add your questions to the Q&A panel below, and we will make sure and try to get to those this session. Just a few parameters before we get started. Everyone is on mute, but you can see and hear us. That's why it's essential for you to add your questions into the Q&A panel below, and you can go ahead and start doing that now. Another thing, there will be a QR code that pops up at the end of the session for a survey. It's going to take less than 2 minutes. Just give us your feedback of how we did for this session. Also, we ask that your questions stay relevant to the topic. Our panelists cannot answer support case questions right now, but our beautiful support team will be able to help you with that. And also, we ask you to also see the Q&A code for our next sessions, where you can scan and register for our upcoming session, April 25th of this year. Again, the topic for the day is Qlik Sense Enterprise Monitoring and Observability. My name is Emmanuel Herndon, and I'm a digital customer success specialist here at Qlik that works with helping the customer from trial to renewals and anything in their journey, with a focus on webinars and videos to enhance that journey. I am not doing this alone. My co-host Troy, my colleague, is helping do this Q&A Qlik with me. Will you say hello, Troy?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Troy Rainey. I love doing these Q&A with Qliks with Manny, and largely I help make webinars and helpful videos like this one. And we've got two excellent experts with us today to share their expertise. Mario, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you all today again. My name is Mario Petre. I've been a member of the technical support team in our Lund office since 2015, and focused since then on our Qlik Sense enterprise software and all sorts of scalability and performance topics. And I'm happy to talk observability with you all today.
Levi?
I'm Levi Turner. I've got a convoluted title, but it's Master Principal Analytics Platform Architect. I'm in pre-sales, but I've been at Qlik for going on 8 years now, spanning the time between working in the support group for a few years and then in pre-sales since then. And I deal with a lot of platform level concerns across all of our platforms, whether they're QlikView, client managed, Qlik Sense, or SaaS.
Great. Well, everybody, it's time to enter those questions in the Q&A panel. And I see we've already got one come in. I'll go ahead and read it off. The first one: where can I find the best monitoring tools to use? Levi, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Mario's going to jump in for some other elements. But the way I tend to think about monitoring the Qlik platform is ultimately, we got the Qlik assets, so your applications. You've got the server, and those are two pretty distinct types of things you'd want to monitor. For the Qlik assets themselves, the stock monitoring apps that come with the tool, they're installed to program data, Qlik Sense repository default apps if they aren't present in your system. So you can get them if should they be deleted, or whether you want some of the what we call hidden ones that aren't installed by default. But operations and license monitor, those are the ones every site generally has. Those are shipped with the product installed and should be up and running. These are pretty essential to have running because a lot of other metadata apps piggyback off the connections they use, and then there's an additional set of, I call them the more boutique ones. Log Monitor, really focused on analyzing logs because that's a pretty heavy task. Reloads, again, focus purely on reloads. Think of these as slices of the operations monitor that are purpose driven to being subsets rather than the monstrosity the operations monitor is in many respects. Sessions, again, slice of the operations, focus more on user access, the connector logs analyzer, as well as the app metadata analyzer. The app metadata analyzer is a bit of a unique app in that it monitors, it gives you a holistic view of the application metadata. So how large the application is in memory, how large it is on reload, how many columns, how many fields, what's the size of those fields, what's the size of the columns, are there synthetic keys across the applications? This is a really great asset that every site really should have, so you can have insight across all of your estate, because most people don't know what's going on with every app in their estate. And it's certainly possible that a developer did a poor select star, which is going to impact performance across the server as a whole. So this is an extremely useful tool that far too few people have. Outside of the sort of stock experience, the other essential Qlik app that I'd point to is the telemetry dashboard. What this does is it visualizes some product logging that you can enable. The product logging has been in there for quite some time, but ultimately you have to configure the Qlik Sense Enterprise platform to do this special type of logging, and then you can build an application that then sort of surfaces that and gives you visibility. And this will give you performance metrics for every object inside of Qlik, right? So if a bar chart takes 10 seconds to load, it could report that. If a table object takes 2 minutes to load, it can report that. So it's very useful for getting very, very deep, rather than telling a developer, hey, your app's slow. You say, hey, this bar chart takes 2 minutes to load. We need to move it down. We need to get it below 30 seconds. You can get very, very specific very quickly, which helps to bridge the gap between sort of traditional administrative activities, server admin activities, and application development activities. I'll stop sharing there. Mario, if you wanted to hop onto the cover the things that you covered previously on the Techspert Thursday.
Sure, I'd love to. All right, so there's a bunch of links and everything is external to our documentation, but let's take a look at some of these examples. All right, is screen sharing visible?
Yep, we can see your screen.
All right, fantastic.
Pancakes.
So one of the pancakes are delicious. Let's see the first one that I sort of mentioned, and a lot of what we showed in terms of visualizing results coming from these machines, both in form of logs and metrics, was done through Grafana and their fantastic dashboard system. Other technologies used from the same product group was Loki for extracting logs from Windows machines, and I also recommend Prometheus as a metric ingester. One way that you can leverage that in the Windows ecosystem is through Windows Exporter. There's another project called WMI Exporter. These are special tools that help you bring in these machine metrics, both from a Windows level performance, so CPU, RAM usage, and also log extraction from specific software like Qlik, and bring those into Prometheus metrics gathering. We also took a look at the Butler monitoring family. This is now growing. I'm happy to report this is a great landing page to read about it and start understanding how this can help you in your Qlik operations. Something else that I've been using in my career here at Qlik, and with large customers especially, as this is typically already deployed in organizations, Elasticsearch and their Elk stack. So Elastic as a search indexer and engine, Logstash as a way to to extract logs from Windows and ship them up to the Elasticsearch index, and then Kibana, the last component, to visualize it all and to explore the data. Another third-party platform that many of our large enterprise customers started to rely on recently is Datadog. This is, again, an industry standard observability platform that I encourage you to look at. And many, many more things to come as we start receiving questions from the audience today. So I'll leave it here and we'll kick it back to the Q&A.
We have a question that someone is asking, and they're saying, one area I struggle with in self-service environments is identifying the cause of server lag. Our theory will be a user running a poorly written load script, but I can't tell who is running it. and how much RAM they are using. Is there a way to get this info in real time?
Yes, there's a couple of ways that you can go about that, and help me out here, Levi. But one thing that I would definitely set up to begin with is the telemetry dashboard. This will help you in understanding per app and object resource consumption inside the Qlik ecosystem. You can complement that with machine level metrics such as global CPU and RAM usage, not just that taken by Qlik services, but everything else that's happening on that server. And of course, knowing the user that you're trying to investigate helps, but by default, I believe all reloads would be running under the scheduler account, the internal system scheduler account. So if you don't have reload impersonation turned on, filtering your existing logs by username won't necessarily help, especially in the case of a scheduled task. This is a lot easier when reloads happen through the hub. They're also easier to identify, and those would be connected to a specific user ID and their session. So that's a good place to start.
Great. There was a question. Was kind of
let me come on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Unmute there, and I'll put the put it into the chat. But ultimately, there's another tool that is out there that's developed. I think Mario, you referenced it in the Text for Thursday, but the Butler Platform from Gordon. It does monitor, again, monitoring application level performance in a sort of global engine, right? An engine may have 10 apps, 100 apps open at once. It gets a little trickier, but you can at least sort of filter down the subsets. But Butler does parse out the there's an engine metadata or health check endpoint that'll provide you performance characteristics. How much RAM, the running tally of CPU, what apps are open, and that can at least sort of allow you to start to point in the direction of when we have problems. We had a problem at 9 a.m. We had a problem, at 1 p.m. These 10 apps were open at 9 a.m. These 11 at 1, and you can start to do diffing it out and get a sense of what are the applications that are involved or at play there. I would say it's a bit of a hodgepodge of different things, because you're monitoring server level performance, which is your sort of reliable indicator of performance, and then application level characteristics, as well as sessions that were open. So you have to sort of meld a bunch of different types of information together. But Butler SOS is really an excellent tool for that. Just because it sort of surfaces and visualizes it. I mean, the API is there; anyone can access it and build an application off of it. But it does use sort of modern monitoring techniques, which is the nice part about Mario's presentation, which is it focuses on what is the best in breed for this. It seems heavy. A lot of organizations already have these tools in place. They may even have enterprise tooling, Splunk Enterprise, as opposed to sort of freemium software or free software. So if you already have that server level performance stuff, use that ultimately. Don't re-engineer the stack, right? If you have access to it, already monitor that. But typically it's going to be a join of performance characteristics. What is the server performance? What apps are open? And what time frames? Those are the three sort of most important characteristics.
And I would even double down on that. Don't overcomplicate the stack and don't reinvent the stack. Windows itself has performance monitor, and we use that in support scenarios very, very often, as other tools won't be available, or at least not immediately, as we're trying to rescue a system and get back everybody back online. So there you can also differentiate between service level resource consumption and machine level resource consumption, and kind of start digging deeper into what happens with very good time granularity. My main problem with the monitoring tools is the time granularity factor. First, it only tells you about stuff once it's already happened, so you can't really use the built-in monitoring apps to monitor real-time activity. Butler SOS is a much better platform for that, for example, as it receives those signals in real time, or as near real time as it can get. But start at the lowest level possible. Try to understand what's happening on the machine in general during those activities, and it helps to isolate those workloads. When you have a problematic app and user combo, isolating them to a specific node so that you can dive deeper into their activity I find that helpful.
There's been some follow-ups in the chat to that. The original poster said in self-service environments, users often run reloads manually when that's the environment he's trying to troubleshoot.
Yeah, so those would be traceable through the user ID and session ID, because they're run on the consumption node, where their session is being served or the app is loaded.
All right, moving on to the next question. Are there plans that you guys know about to implement the usability of Butler and so on, or similar tools in Qlik for live monitoring?
I don't think we have to. I mean, the third-party ecosystem is growing at such a rapid pace, both from industry standard participants like Grafana and Elasticsearch, as well as our extensive partner ecosystem. And again, this goes back to Levi's comment about reinventing the stack. We produce signals about resource consumption in a number of ways. Now, what is the best way for your organization to ingest and keep track of these metrics over time? That's kind of up to the individual business scenario, I would say. And from my part, it feels like a little too much for the Qlik Sense platform to handle itself. And most of these metrics, again, are coming from open API endpoints that are very well documented. So there's nothing stopping you from implementing or tailoring something that works very, very well for you.
Thank you for that. Next question. Which third-party dashboard would you suggest if we wanted to monitor what a user clicks on? This is useful when investigating reporting for users having greater access. They should. I believe that they should.
This is more of a governance question than performance, but a very good topic nonetheless.
Yeah, auditing.
Yeah, I would say this has more to do with data governance and auditing rather than performance. If they have access to something they shouldn't, the performance concerns are the least of your problems, or very low on your problem list. Now let's try to think of a different way to put this so that we can talk about it.
I would separate out what is the access you're referring to, right? Are you talking about in-app access? So it's effectively section access, right? The section access is written incorrectly. They can see a hierarchical value they shouldn't see, or can they see apps that they cannot? Because the app access, that is effectively something you can pretty easily programmatically determine. In the QMC under audit, you can audit what users have access to see the effective access and say, Mario, if he were to log in, he would see apps 1 to 100. There's an API underneath that you can sort of programmatically figure out what users have access to what apps. That is not that difficult, but the app access bit is a bit trickier because ultimately that's an in-memory model. So the only real effective answer is sort of either programatize that or sort of standardize what apps use section access and reviewing those, which is a bit more of a heavy task.
So one in the past, when troubleshooting section access level issues, one recommendation that I have for customers is to set up a dedicated temporary virtual proxy in their Sense platform, set it up for header authentication so that they can easily impersonate business users. This has to be done with good business controls in place, of course, and only authorized people should do that. But it's a great way to validate that the data slice that you're configuring for that user is correct once the app is actually loaded. But it's something difficult to do programmatically because the app has to be opened by the user in the section access table in memory in order to figure out exactly what to show and what not to show.
And it's a bit more in the weeds, but ultimately section access is just a table. It's hidden from you. So if you were to comment out the section access declaration and the section application declaration and reload that app, you'd now have another table in the model, and you can just use the associative engine to say, Mario, he's got this user ID. What is associated? What dimensional values are associated? So that to me is the way I approach it, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. I just sort of dupe the app, reload it without it being section access mode, and then sort of drill down and use the associativity of the engine just to figure that out. Because again, section access is just a table in memory that's sort of hidden. It's used for security purposes, but it's really just a table. So I would approach it that way rather than trying to overcomplicate things. If we're just starting out, if you wanted to confirm things before going to production, Mario's example is absolutely fantastic. Validate in a non-production environment before going to production, emulate some users, verify things, and then move to prod. So header works. There's a litany of other tools to be able to emulate users. Our team created a tool called iPortal. I think it still runs. It's built off stable APIs, but it's just, I haven't really used it in a while. But there's a lot of ways to emulate users. Header being the sort of easiest, but least secure in a sense. But yeah, if you Google user emulation in Qlik, you should get a number of techniques that may fit you a bit better, depending on the environment.
Yeah, I remember Dan Pilla did a session on section access. It was really good, and I think he used that tool.
Yeah, maybe we can reference that. Otherwise, a Qlik Fix video is in the works.
Yeah, exactly.
Since, this is a topic of interest.
I just want to mention that Yuran made a comment. He was the one who posted that stuff about setting up Butler OS, and he said the key is often to correlate user events in the sense log files with issues occurring. This allows you to see who was active the very moment the issue happened. So I appreciate that input. Next question. There's a couple questions about Qlik Cloud, and that wasn't quite the topic for today, but since we got some experts here, let's see what you guys can help with. Is there a documentation for the Qlik Cloud Monitoring apps with more details than the sheet or community post introducing the different apps, like what Levi was showing on Qlik Help? So you guys aware of any documentation relevant to those?
As someone who's on the team that has produced a lot of these apps, no, there's not really that much more documentation. I'll definitely be screenshotting this and sending it to our product teams, because we would love these to be sort of first class citizens in the product. We just need to get that done there. But I'd say comment on the threads if you have particular questions there, because I know, myself, Dan Pila, who wrote the bulk of the apps, the Reload Monitor, app metadata, and the audit app. I think it's Entitlement Analyzer. We all monitor those threads and answer any questions. So I'd go there if you want sort of specific questions about what can and can't be monitored, which this sort of bleeds into the other question there about is session usage per sheet available in Qlik Cloud? And I'd say session information is absolutely available via the Entitlement Analyzer. So Entitlement Analyzer, Qlik. Let's pull this up. Share screen. So the Entitlement Analyzer, this has on that last sheet there, app consumption. This tells you what users open, what apps when, as well as the license type they use. This is where you'd get sort of session level information, but in terms of sub session level information like sheet usage, that's not exposed to date. So Entitlement Analyzer as the first pass, and then from there, unfortunately, you're going to have to go back to the sort of old tried and true method, which is interview users, right? And get a sense of what people are using. If you're using it to sort of curate what's useful, you get 10 sheets, you don't know if they're all used. You may have to do more focused interviews with your users, but start out figuring out which users are opening the app and then go from there.
Yeah. And don't assume that.
And you went on mute there, Ryan.
Sorry, we lost you.
Nope, sorry. I was talking to Siri for a moment. I don't know why. So what I was trying to say is, if it ain't there today in cloud, don't assume it will ever be there. It may be there tomorrow. I know there's a lot of observability and auditing tools and mechanisms being implemented and worked on for coming releases. So yeah, stay tuned on this space and continue the conversation on community. We'll be happy to tell you when something new is available. I did want to talk a little bit about the best practices on monitoring apps on Windows specifically. In order for them to be effective, I think one of the strategies to be used could be 3-4 different tiers of apps. And I would say, especially for the operations monitor and the log monitor, I would have a version of that reloaded every day that has data only for that day, a version of the week data, and a version of monthly data with aggregations. There is no reason to reload that monthly chunk of data every day. That alone can cause performance issues and dramatically reduce its usefulness. I would say when you need quick answers by poking through the data model and making selections and trying to figure out exactly what happened, or to identify trends. Try to figure out what type of questions you're trying to get answers to before just going and reload, give me everything. Because first, you could be waiting for a very long time for that to finish, and second, that app may not even contain the level of detail that you need. So yeah, try with a small data window first, and make sure that the indicators that you're looking for are there. And if not, move on to something else.
And Mario, I'm curious your sort of gut feeling here, because that's at scale that definitely makes sense, right? If you've got 10 nodes, you've got 30,000 users, those apps can get quite large. Is there a scale point where you start to say this needs to happen? Because if you have 10 users on a site, who really cares? That app's pretty
small.
Obviously
no. But one way to look at this is log volumes, for example. So take any of the proxy logs. Do you have more than 5 of them per day in your archive logs folder? Then I would say, yeah, start chunking down your monitoring apps, because those will be 8 megabytes-ish each per node, and they can be dozens and dozens of them per day. Yeah, trying to chunk those down and then filtering down on the sort of topics that you want to see in those logs as well makes sense. But for small to medium-sized customers, where either concurrency is not a big factor or the amount of nodes is not a big factor, that could end up acting as a multiplier, let's say, in the data volume that you would ultimately get, I would keep it as simple as possible. But for large-ish enterprises, so huge concurrency, over 1,000 users per day, or 1,000 sessions, let's say, that I would start to chunk those down. And depending on the level too, right? So if you're trying to understand audience level changes over time, you would focus on the sessions one, and you would need a longer time frame to understand how your audience is moving or evolving over the different projects and different applications. If you're trying to understand what happened with RAM consumption on a particular node, you would want to rely more on daily metrics for that. And the great thing about like lifting and shipping this off, like doing this analysis outside of the monitoring apps, is that this time frame slicing happens in the metrics engine and not in Qlik Sense. And because these tools rely on time series databases instead of just regular relational databases, it is much, much faster for you to filter down from a month's worth of metrics down to what happened in this 15-second slice across the board of multiple services. Well, that's an excellent follow-up. Not everybody should bother to do this, of course.
I would also vote to think about what's your usage pattern, right? So I mean, let's say we're experiencing issues. You may reload the operations monitor or the sessions monitor or whichever app you find valuable on demand 20 times within a day. I wouldn't set up a every minute reload for that purpose, right? You're going to be using several resources to reload an app no one views. So really start to think in terms of what the consumption pattern of that app is. By default, the operations and license monitor reloads every hour, which for a lot of sites is not important, right? If you're going to check it at most once a day, adjust the reload schedule. And the same for any other monitoring app you use. Is sort of focus on what you're using it for, and not just I want to have the latest and greatest and see a little line chart wiggle throughout the day. Because if you're not opening the app, you're just using resources for no purpose.
Yeah,
which
and that's a huge resource expenditure, I would say, just to look at CPU and RAM metrics, for example, or even the session count go up and down. Butler, for example, can give you those metrics in real time with barely any resource overhead on the Qlik Sense side.
Okay, thank you. Great discussion. But we have a few more questions we need to get to. One of them being, what monitoring is possible with QSDA Pro in Qlik Cloud, which native feature can't handle, like looking for issues with apps, expression objects, duplicating master items, etc.
QSDA Pro.
So QSDA Pro, so Qlik Sense Document Analyzer Pro is a tool created by Rob Wunderlich, which is a sort of next generation of his long-running document analyzer apps. He's had them for QlikView, for Qlik Sense. He's had
I've used them,
many iterations. Really excellent tools, and not that I need to plug it necessarily, but extremely affordable. Like the price for QSDA Pro is really, really affordable. That you may not even get approval for your expense report to purchase it. But what it does, just for context, and then we can go to alternatives or other things. Pro, easy click. Let's go. I forget the exact website that he uses. I usually just Google things. What it does is basically drill inside of an application, right? So it rather than thinking, think of the app metadata. That's every app, but not inside of an app. That's metadata about an app. QSDA Pro focuses more on what's inside of the application, right? So what expressions do you have? What's the response time for individual sheets? What is the nature of the actual fields you have, right? What's the cardinality? Do you have imperfect keys? So it really focuses on granular recommendations about in-app level stuff. So I'd say in product, there's nothing that's going to replicate exactly everything that he's doing. There is an automation that exists. It's called the Qlik Field Usage Automation, created by a colleague of mine, which basically says what fields are used inside of an app, right? So I've got 500 fields in an app. I don't know exactly what's being used. It will show you what is being used. And here's a little video there that sort of focus it, just sort of drill into the view of it, but ultimately it allows you to get a sense of these fields are not being used. And if you were to drop those fields, you would save X amount of RAM. So in this example, there are about 400 unused fields that if we were to drop those fields, we would save a good proportion of the RAM, 66% of the RAM usage. So that is one element of what Rob has in his package. He does far more than that. And there's not an in-product capability that does that, because ultimately it requires an opinion, right? You have to have an opinion about what things should be as opposed to what is. The metadata endpoints that Qlik has are really good about telling you what exists, not about what it should be, because in all honesty, the opinions differ. But Rob's tool, really excellent. I'd say if I were doing Qlik development on a day-to-day basis, I'd want to use it, because ultimately it'll save your butt if you make a little mistake, or you're taking over a new app you're not exactly familiar with. You want to get a sense of what's there, what is used, what's not used. Really excellent for that.
And for the data governance part and understanding how to optimize data models and how to deliver the least amount of usable data to users, I would point you all to NodeGraph. That's a great way to understand your data lineage more on the backend side of things, right? And understand how your data sources are being accessed. And that in itself can be part of this picture of what fields are being used, what data tables are being used inside of your apps. And a whole bunch of cleanup can be done there as well. So don't load things that your users are not going to use. Don't load things that your apps are not going to use at the graphical level. I think, would you say, Levi, that running these side by side it would be complementary, or one would get you more to a good answer than the other?
Depends on the question you're having. Ultimately, right? I mean, NodeGraph will get you a sense of or the Qlik lineage connectors, which sort of the same thing at this point. That will tell you, okay, I've got a field called profit. Where does it come from? It comes from a QVD, which is then loaded from a Redshift database. And so if I were to mess with that QVD, then I'd impact the consumption of that field. So think of it in terms of field level tracking. So a database is changing, your schema is changing, you're migrating to Snowflake. You want to get a sense of where your sources are and sort of mapping of things. That's an excellent use case there, and they do an excellent job at that. Once you're in the app, right, you've got the model built. Things are reloading is perfectly fine. You still need to have opinions about how to develop the app. Going back to the question about performance. Yeah. You notice that one sheet is performing terribly. You get a lot of reports about it. Well, what's wrong, right? You could say, let's just throw a calculation condition on that sheet, on the table that's in that sheet, and say you have to drill down to make selections. That's the first thing most people approach the problem with. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, you'll need to think about, What's the model? What's the data model? How are we presenting data? And that's where Rob's tool can be an excellent complement about having opinions about the actual underlying structure of the model, as well as the expressions therein, right? If you've got your 6 nested ifs, because that seems intuitive, it will call that out. So think of it as data flowing into the app. You want to have lineage. Once the data is in the app, you want to have lineage to the expressions, and the expression part is the part that Rob's tool does an excellent job with, as well as there's I'm sure a ton of other open source or sort of freemium tools out there for that purpose as well.
There was a follow-up question that I want to address. Node graph, except Qlik lineage connector cannot be used anymore, doesn't it? That was a question just to clarify about the use of node graph. How that works.
Let me just double check, because I haven't sold it recently. But again, I sell more of the SaaS platform than client managed platform. So it looks like in July of 2024, July of 2024, it will be deprecated, the node graph product. So that was announced on January 11th, 2023. So it can be used. The question is ultimately
how long it'll be supported.
How long it'll be supported for. And there looks to be an email that was sent out to customers.
And I don't think that what we're dropping here is the capabilities, maybe just that specific product branch, but as I understand it, we'll be building those capabilities into a specific lineage connector that will allow you to extract the same sort of information, but without necessarily maybe the node graph interface.
Yeah, I'm looking to it. Yeah, I mean that's the way to interpret it. Is ultimately we're deprecating the client managed as the nexus of things, and instead sort of focusing it through SaaS. So you can you can use the lineage connectors, present that data into a SaaS tenant from your client managed environment, and that's the part that we're making a decision on, not necessarily the capabilities.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to give you time to complete the thought.
Yeah, and I wanted to quickly appreciate Göran's response here. He's absolutely right. One other thing that I didn't think about when it comes to slicing and reducing the size of your monitoring apps is to build them on demand with on-demand app generation based on time selections that you need in the moment, and kind of just have that large level app be reloaded over time. I honestly don't think that these apps are useful until you actually need to consult them. Having them reloaded in the background without eyeballs on them is a waste of resources, in my opinion. But of course, if you don't do periodic reloads, the moment that you do need it to troubleshoot something or to gain some insights, you may be waiting for that for a long time, unless you know the time frame that you want to look at, in which case ODAG is your friend.
Okay, thank you. Next question is lengthy, but let's go through it. In a hybrid development, Qlik SaaS on-site Sense Enterprise on-site Qlik View on-site QAP, is extremely hard to get usage by app metrics across all platforms. The best so far is usage by app in the Enterprise Sense License Monitor, but that doesn't include QAP site usage. And then this entitlement analyzer helps on SaaS, but limits to SaaS usage. And this note also would be nice to pull in the catalog and stream metadata in those views. Would it be very helpful, as it said, would be very helpful as we try to migrate more to SaaS?
All right, thank you, Debbie, for those comments. I would have to agree with you there. Yes, we don't have a unified metrics platform at the moment, but we're making efforts in that direction for sure. And there's going to be a lot more data sources that you'll be able to bring into your admin console in cloud. But I am interested about this QAP part. It's essentially Qlik Sense on Windows without the hub. It should be able to you should be able to leverage the same monitoring applications. I'm not sure what the blocker is there in QAP. Maybe you can ask a follow-up question, and we'll think about that.
To jump in, you can use the default monitoring apps, but I think she's asking more for the aggregation of all the different places, right? So we've got, we have client managed QlikView and Qlik Sense, we have QAP, and we have SaaS. I want to have a unified master and commander of everything, right? I want to monitor all 4 of the individual installations, and to that end, you certainly can take the data from those applications and sort of build something yourself. Like the models are already built in all 3 of them. But to Mario's point, there's not a unified master and commander app that sort of runs sort of bespoke for now. The license monitoring Qlik Sense will get you both Qlik Sense and QlikView. There's a way to sort of analyze QlikView logs as well, so that'll get you 2 of them. You've got the entitlement analyzer inside of SaaS, and then the operations monitor or license monitor from the QAP side. That may just require a little bit of dumping of data to QVDs and then pulling that into a unified view of the client managed portions. Then you have a SaaS portion of things.
All right,
that's a good tip. These are great questions. I appreciate everybody's participation in this. Next question, unfortunately another Qlik Cloud question, he says, but is an administrative application planned for the future, which, for example, might include QMC change logs? There is an event tab in the administration console, but unfortunately only limited filtering is possible here. Thank you very much.
So 0 visibility into that roadmap, but I will take it to those discussions for sure. Thanks for the feedback and suggestion. Do you know anything about this, Levi?
I'm not aware of anything, but it's honestly a very broad topic. I'd be certainly curious about what are the types of things you want to monitor. For example, another attendee mentioned sheet usage. That I know we've raised that from a pre-sales angle with product management several times as being an absolutely essential ingredient to deploy at scale, because you need to be able to curate the stuff that's been created. You can exist for 2-3 years on a site and not have it not come up, but after that point you start to really need it, especially with large number of users. But if you have more specific requirements.
I think this was more from an admin standpoint, so kind of understanding QMC level change log and keeping track of who makes what types of changes. So groups and space, administration, app application, that sort of stuff is what I'm gathering. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention I threw into the chat the link to Qlik Ideation, so I think that'd be an excellent forum for making product requests like this. And you put your idea in there, and the more people, it gets some attention to what customers are needing, and our product managers and R&D definitely take a look at that.
Actively monitored by architects and product managers. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions if you guys want to go and submit. One that I would love to bring up is, if you guys can shed some light on it, is setting up alerts for admins. So is there any kind of threshold alerts that you might be able to set, or how can we find documentation on building alerts so that on top of monitoring, like there's some mechanism built in?
So that's sort of from my part, it depends on what you have in place for monitoring. Oftentimes alerting comes along in those suites. So Grafana Loki, for example, and all the Grafana suites, Prometheus, etc., they have an alerts and notifications layer on top of it. But of course, you need to define those thresholds. There are warnings and alerts that you can get based on the telemetry dashboard. So, but those would be more specific to your system and resource consumption there. but that also requires you to understand what is normal versus anormal. Pointing to these cloud-based observability tools. So one of the great things that you can do in Prometheus, as well as in Datadog and in Elasticsearch with the right level of subscription, is anomaly detection. So you have a system that is constantly looking at certain indicators that you select and tries to understand what is a standard deviation, what is normal usage, what is abnormal usage, and you can set like percentage thresholds instead of fixed amounts to be alerted. So if something increases by 10%, for example, if RAM consumption all of a sudden goes up 50% compared to usual metrics, you can be alerted based on that. There's nothing in the product per se to set these up. You would need something to monitor those metrics and then alert you based on that. But most of the tools that we showcased during the SDT have that layer built in. And of course, in cloud, you have alerts that are native to the product there.
Great. Well, everybody, thank you so much for your questions. This has been a really great session. Oh,
yeah. So to address
Chris's
last comment here, I am fully aware of that, and we're going to be working very hard from support together with the community at large to severely improve the situation during this year. So I would love us to have a repository of templates for Loki, for Elasticsearch, for Datadog, just to make those integrations a lot easier for admins. But thank you very much.
Well, guys, here is a QR code to a survey about today's session. We love getting your feedback. And just as a reminder, our next session will be Tuesday, April 25th, and we're going to be focusing on Qlik Replicate then. I want to thank our panelists today, Mario and Levi. I really appreciate having you guys share with us. Thank you for making this happen. And thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.